Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Osint Bunker podcast in collaboration with the UK Defense Journal. With me today is Defense Geek and Intel Aaron C. We're going to be talking about a few things today on episode 10. I think we're going to hit on Afghanistan, Cuba, South Africa, Carrier Strike Group 21, and a few other things that, honestly, I did not write down. So let's just get right into it.
Yeah, so in the last couple of episodes, we've kind of looked a little bit at the situation in Afghanistan, and last week, or last episode rather, myself and Technical, we went into quite a lot of detail on the ongoing crisis and the concerns that there are there. I think it's fair to say there's been some developments since we last spoke.
Yes, there have. So I think the main thing to focus on, and I had done a thread about this on my Twitter, was that it's most likely that the Taliban will not win Afghanistan by actually physically taking cities that that are strongholds for the government that's currently in power. What we will probably end up seeing is that what they're doing right now, which is cutting off the official government from their sources of income and their ability to actually run the country. So we saw them capture some major border crossings into Pakistan, which have effectively at this point cut off the government in Kabul from land routes to other countries, which means basically any supplies they get in have to either come through Taliban territory or be flown in. And with the US not there to exactly supply that to them, it's most likely that we're going to see more and more pressure put on the government in Kabul. Additionally, we're seeing some tensions caused by the Taliban capturing areas adjacent to Pakistan. We saw the Pakistani Air Force actually threaten to strike Afghan government forces who were pushing too close to the border. We've also seen some spillover of the conflict into the tribal areas of Pakistan, which the Pakistani government does not like. And additionally, geopolitically in the region, Iran seems to be getting, how do I put this, antsy at the current situation. Former President Ahmadinejad, why can I never say that name correctly? I don't think anyone in the U.S. can. Said, and I'll put this tweet on the screen, a dangerous political game in Afghanistan will soon be greatly regretted by the deceived ones. No one's really sure who he refers to as the deceived ones. But it could be Pakistan, it could be Tehran. But at this point, again, we're seeing a large portion of territory with effectively no real governmental control. I mean, I know the Taliban exists there, but yeah, we're not sure. And of course, there will always be regional tensions between Tehran and Pakistan as well, mostly because Pakistan has aligned itself at least somewhat closely with the U.S. I know that relationship has a fairly long history, but I do expect to see some sort of evolution between those two countries in the near future, especially as the U.S. withdraws from the region.
Yeah, and this threat that Pakistan has made towards the Afghan forces, it's quite a surprise, really. I think, considering it's when the threat was initially made, it was very much Pakistan saying, "Yeah, we don't want you operating anywhere near our border," but it's showing a very clear commitment from the Pakistani government to supporting the Taliban. And
Yes, which we definitely, as we talked about in our last episode, we weren't exactly sure what Pakistan was going to do because of their relationship with the Taliban in the first place.
and I think it's going to be interesting to see, as you say, Pakistan and the US do have a relationship of sorts, and if Pakistan is now very strongly taking sides with the Taliban as the US withdraws, I wonder if we will see a shift in the US relationship with Pakistan, or whether the US is just going to accept that you know, a friend of its friend is its enemy, if that makes
At
sense.
least the current administration has sort of separated its existence with the existence of the Taliban
Mm.
and the Afghan government. So I think right now the current U.S. position is to sort of distance itself from all parties, um, and basically just protect their assets in Kabul, and that's effectively it. So we might not exactly see that much. How do I put this? Tension between the three parties, just as the U.S. removes itself.
Mm.
The current administration sort of has a its position is distancing and unplugging from Afghanistan and basically just washing our hands of the situation. So that basically, as long as you um, look at the entire situation through that lens, that will sort of be able to give you a good idea of where the U.S. stands right now and where different players in the region stand.
Mm.
Um, so it's weird because now Pakistan is the closest we have to sort of a NATO ally in the region. Um, and they're acting against what used to be NATO interests. So it's this very interesting evolution, and we may see it. We may see the conflict completely change in nature as well, especially as Iran also looks to get involved as the security situation devolves on their eastern border.
Yeah, and I don't know if I said this last episode, but it is worth remembering that the conflict in Afghanistan is not just the last 20 years with NATO and the US being heavily involved. The war in Afghanistan has been going on for well over 40 years at this point. Um, sort of civil conflict between the Taliban and government forces, and then obviously it sort of came to the world's attention with the events of 9/11 and the invasion about 20 years ago now. Um, the war in Afghanistan is far from over. Just because the US and NATO withdraw doesn't mean that things are going to settle down. We've, like we said, we've talked about that last episode, um, and I think we're starting to see now a sort of a rough idea of what the future for Afghanistan looks like. And as we say,
Graveyard of empires.
yeah, and we're seeing obviously Pakistan get involved and Iran, um, and obviously the Taliban is going from strength to strength. Um, it's concerning, and I don't think it's at all what any Western governments want to see going on. But they, they've pulled out. They've left Afghanistan to its own devices, and unfortunately, they will probably reap the consequences.
Yeah, and of course we also saw over the past few days. We're recording this on Sunday the 18th, but over the past few days we've seen the Afghan ambassador's daughter be kidnapped in Pakistan and then released. And then just today, Afghanistan actually recalled their ambassador as well for multiple reasons. The kidnapping was one of them, but we also saw, of course, the degrading of Afghan Pakistani relations, which probably had something to do with the ambassador being recalled. So let's move on to Cuba right now. That of course is happening in my proverbial backyard this time. But it looks like there have been massive protests by the Cuban people, spurred by the latest very very large outbreak of COVID in the country. They actually did very well up until the last few months with the Delta variant, but the people have definitely not liked that, and it looks like this was a fairly organic, social media driven set of protests that the Cuban government cracked down very, very hard on,
Mm.
using pretty much all of the authoritarian playbooks of state-sponsored counter-protesters, utilizing the military, police, special units, arresting protest leaders. Um, Notably, it seems like they've used a Chinese version of the Great Firewall in order to shut down certain portions of internet traffic and go for pinpoint censoring on the web, which is very, very interesting. Over the past 10 years, China has definitely helped build up Cuba's internet infrastructure. And with that, of course, they've provided material support to their signals intelligence facility in Lourdes as well, which is in northern Cuba and is used to observe and spy on U.S. activities in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's of course that's very, very interesting. Um, and then on top of that, you know, it seems like that Chinese style of shutting down protests worked fairly well. Um, they have mostly fizzled out at this point. We did see the U.S. make, of course, what were effectively piecemeal statements, supporting the protesters and saying that the Cuban regime must be overturned. But apart from that, I mean, it seems like that Chinese help definitely saved Cuba in this circumstance.
Yeah, and it's like you say, it's not entirely protests about COVID, although obviously that has been a factor. Um, I think it's the Cuban people have really sort of decided they've had enough with the current government, and with the corruption that's going on there. And obviously, this comes at a time when the Caribbean is really rather quite a volatile place. We've obviously seen the incident a couple of weeks ago now, in Haiti with the assassination of the president of Haiti. You've had ongoing issues in Venezuela, which sort of borders onto the Caribbean, and obviously there's been everything else that's going on. You've got major hurricane season around about this time of year for that part of the world, and the ongoing drug smuggling operations that occur across that expanse of ocean. So that it comes at a very volatile time, and
Yeah, and the U.S. definitely seems to be retraining its focus to not just domestic issues, but issues that are at least closer to home, which
mm,
means something, happening in Haiti or Cuba may draw additional U.S. attention. Though, granted, the current administration is also hesitant to act outside of U.S. borders. So there certainly is that as well. Or at least act outside of U.S. borders in a military manner.
yeah,
I know the Haitian government requested U.S. troops to secure, correction, the Haitian prime minister, um, who, let's just say, definitely is a suspicious actor in the assassination of the president, um, proceeded to request U.S. Military support to secure Port-au-Prince, specifically the oil facilities, the airport, and government buildings, which he definitely was trying to use the U.S. to legitimize his claim and legitimize his takeover using emergency powers as well. So we're definitely that was probably a conversation that was had inside the White House, and most likely the reason that the U.S. hasn't deployed troops there is because it would be seen as effectively supporting this, emergency takeover of power, and it would have been effectively the prime minister of Haiti using U.S. troops as mercenaries per se.
mm,
And I know he thought he could lure them in with the sweet word of oil, but apparently that did not work this time. So I guess let's move on to at least right now South Africa. I know we just had a fairly awkward moment of silence while messaging, but I think this is an area that Jordan wants to touch on.
Well, as of right now, it's considerably quieter than it has been over the past, well, week or so. It's
Yeah, I
obviously
would say, yeah.
it's seemingly calmed down now with obviously the deployment of the army out in much with the deployment of the army in much greater numbers.
Yeah, I think I made the joke that armored personnel carriers on the streets of major cities is a very 2021 bingo card moment.
Well, I mean,
Mm.
they had the rattles with the rattles were deployed to get the troops about. A lot of the rattles that we saw moving about were the command variants really used to for coordinating the actions, and obviously they we deployed the Lycats, and they got they got sent in. Was it Umschlanger? It wasn't Umschlanger. It was somewhere in Durban. They got sent, and they acted as more of a show of force to the protesters. Obviously, we had the maritime rapid reaction teams were also called up to be deployed as well.
Yeah, we
And
definitely go ahead.
I was just going to say they're present now outside pretty much any major government building or large shopping mall that hasn't been burnt and smashed up. They're pretty much present everywhere now.
Yeah, that definitely is something we saw, and granted, this was all driven by the arrest of
Jacob
Jacob
Zuma,
Zuma.
entirely driven by that.
Yes, and I at least what I was told that this was effectively an implicit threat he had made that the country would see mass unrest if he were to be arrested, detained, or put in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is definitely something that it seems like he used. Well, I mean, the current government called his bluff, and then of course he went through with it.
I mean,
But
you could see it building up to it happening. Building up prior to that, because obviously you had Jacob Zuma threatening, saying, "Oh, if you arrest me, there'll be violence on the streets," and you saw even in the countdown until the counting down until the police went and arrested him, the groups were on the streets already, sort of not sort of like organized, not sort of protesting, but sort of organizing and making their presence visible, so that people would see that they are going to protest. So it was coming, but I don't think anyone expected it to be as violent as what it was.
yeah, and it definitely seems to be the culmination of a lot of tensions. It's been a while since we've seen this level of violence in South Africa.
Well, it'd be the largest the largest deployment of the SANDF since the end of apartheid.
Mm.
Yeah, so this definitely seems to sort of be a culmination, at least, of a lot of not tension per se, but ingrained issues.
And I believe the official figure for the deployment of troops is something in the 25,000 range.
Yeah, about that. Not all of them are frontline. Bearing in mind, a lot of them are more in the forms of logistics as well, and
Mm. Yeah,
not all of them are standing on the streets with an R4 in hand.
yeah. I mean, it's more this. I mean, obviously, the government cracked down hard to prove that threats like this in the future, couldn't be used against the government itself. So this was definitely, at least, in political science, we call this the monopolization of violence in held territory. So the government was definitely trying to prove that they had the monopoly on violence. Um, and just to act as a demonstration to people who wanted to do this in the future as a means to cause issues, not just the protesters themselves, but people who lead the protesters and drive the unrest in the first place.
And I mean, you could potentially end up seeing these protests die down and then pick back up when it gets to later in the Zuma trial, because obviously he's in court, he's in jail for his contempt of court. However,
Yes.
he's potentially going to end up in longer if he's convicted in the bribery cases, which God knows how long he'll be getting sentenced for in that case.
Yeah, we might be. Honestly, this may end up being a very, very long endeavor, which again may drive even more issues into the future.
But I mean, for the most part, like the army deployment, it's not as such a deployment. It's not so much of the army taking control. It's basically they're deployed in an assistance role to the police service.
Hmm.
They're not sort of in control of the situation. They're there to assist the police and provide more, just multiply the numbers
Yeah,
on the
it's sort
ground.
of like how the National Guard is deployed in the U.S. With some frontline service, but mostly in support of the police and to relieve some duties that the police would normally be taking care of, and protecting high risk installations as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we will continue to watch that into the future. I'm sure we will be talking about that for years from now.
I see. I don't see them continuing on for. I can't see them going. The protests continuing on for weeks after now. I see them dying down, but with the potential very much still there for them to spark up again.
Yeah, it's definitely that establishment of a new type of tension. Just because sort of the line has been crossed per se. So I guess let's move on to Carrier Strike Group 21, or
Let's
Carrier Strike Group.
open the mess that is the Type 45.
Oh God, I guess we are entitled to talk about the or not the dragon first.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
It's not the dragon.
That's my fault.
Yeah, so obviously we've had the news this week that HMS Diamond, one of the Type 45 destroyers assigned to the Carrier Strike Group, has obviously suffered some sort of major engineering malfunction, which has necessitated her breaking away from the Carrier Strike Group and reportedly is due to arrive either tonight or early tomorrow in the Italian port of Taranto, where she will undergo what sounds like a fairly major overhaul. I think you could probably tell us more about it, Jordan.
Well, it seems like it's going to have to go under a significant overhaul of the issues because it spent a number of time. I think it was it Suda Bay when they first sort of detected the problems in it. The group passed through the Suez and they stayed behind. Again,
Yeah, I
so
believed it stayed back behind in the Mediterranean. Yeah.
so there's that issue. It's going to go in Toronto, and I mean, I'd expect, i.e., tonight, tomorrow morning, for the RAF to be flying a C-17 out or an A400 with the parts to get it replaced, because it doesn't exactly sound like a simple or a quick fix at this stage.
Potentially, with the level of repairs, we may see multiple aircraft flying in. Currently, Chris Cavas is reporting, this is 30 minutes ago as of right now, that it looks like they're going to be swapping out one of the WR-21 gas turbines, which would be a fairly major job.
I would expect, because the rest of the group's in Duqm in Oman right now, docked there. I would expect the destroyer to rejoin before it sails around India, because that marks a whole nother stage of the deployment, and I don't think they'd want to be on a whole nother stage of the deployment without that vessel.
Yes. I mean, this obviously demonstrates the importance of NATO access to NATO facilities in peacetime and in wartime. Actually, sailing HMS Diamond back to the UK for a repair like this would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
Of
it
course,
highlights the importance of a carrier strike group, of the multinational carrier strike groups, which are a fundamental part of NATO. If you look at any US carrier strike group, there's usually always a NATO ally involved in it.
Yeah, and I'm sure if there's a longer term issue with the Diamond and it has to depart for some sort of longer overhaul, the U.S. would be very willing to replace it with a Burke that's currently deployed into the Indian Ocean. I believe there are several currently right now operating in the region that could be redeployed quickly.
Yeah. And
I mean, it would be disappointing, of course, but something that obviously can be dealt with.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this issue with HMS Diamond is not much of a surprise. It's been a fairly public issue with the Type 45 destroyer that it has had engine troubles over the years. Now, the class did go through a refit of sorts a few years ago to try and rectify the major problems with the engines. For those of you who don't remember, for a long while the engines struggled to deal with hot climates and were constantly breaking down when the ships were deployed to the Persian Gulf region. As I say, there was a refit that was undertaken on the class, and that supposedly fixed most of those issues. But clearly the fact that HMS Diamond has had to drop out and go back to Taranto for this overhaul shows that there are still issues with the class. Hopefully those issues will be rectified. Hopefully it's a design flaw that will not be copied across to the future Type 83s when they eventually begin construction. Because unfortunately it does take one of the more capable surface combatants that the Royal Navy has built in the last 40 years, and it does give it a very, very bad reputation, unfortunately.
They're such capable vessels, i.e. they're some of the best destroyers in the world. It's just this persistent problem, just the reliability question just always worries you.
Yeah. And it doesn't.
I'm getting certain PTSD from the littoral combat ship program, which if you say engine problems around that, well, the entire fleet is getting retired early, very early, in fact, just due to the massive amount of just inherent design problems and issues with the engines and the operation of the vessels themselves.
If there's ever one way to squander money up the wall, that was it.
Yeah, that was a that was bad on a number of different levels, from procurement to government intervention to operation, to just at every level there were issues. And then, of course, Carrier Strike Group 21 is now in Oman after operating for a period of time with multiple U.S. ships, including the USS Ronald Reagan and the USS Iwo Jima. I actually had made the comment that, funny enough, in that 3-ship pairing, the only one operating Harriers was the U.S. ship. Which of course is sort of sad to see, but of course those are going to be replaced soon as well by 2025 with F-35s as well.
So obviously, after we finish up, after the group leaves to come, there's various split-offs are due to take place. I don't know which vessels are going, but one's due to go up into one vessel's due to go into the Persian Gulf. There's a bit of an exercise off the northwest coast of India going up there, and a vessel is due to head south down past Somalia, past Tanzania, through the Seychelles, and past Diego Garcia, and meet back up with the group off the coast of Sri Lanka.
So from what I have seen, it definitely is going to be the Queen Elizabeth that will be operating with the Indian Navy, including their aircraft carrier as well. So 2 ski jump ships operating in the same area at the same time, one with Russian-made aircraft and one with US and UK built aircraft. So that's definitely going to be definitely a moment, at least. Certainly, I know Britain has been marketing its role in India for a while now, along with the US, sort of trying to bring India from that very, very neutral outside sort of the whole NATO Russia situation into one where it's more friendly with NATO and especially the US and the UK. So that's definitely going to be a big thing to see in the first place.
That's what we do there. So again, don't know which one's going to go up into the Persian Gulf. Probably a Type 45 or a Type 23 to meet up with HMS Montrose, which is already deployed there.
Yeah, I mean, given that one of the Type 45s from the group has now obviously been pulled from the task group for repairs, I would imagine that they will want to keep the other Type 45 fairly close to the carrier. So I would imagine that regardless of what the plan was before, it's likely either to be the Burke class destroyer from the US or one of the Type 23 frigates that would probably end up going into the Persian Gulf.
I think
it'll be likely to see the Type 23 instead of a Burke.
I would always say what would be interesting as well is going down when it goes down past Somalia, past Tanzania, into the sea, past the Seychelles. Probably see meeting up with the EU Naval Force Somalia there on their counter-piracy ops.
Yes, of course the South Koreans have had some issues with that as well. They are actually they have a destroyer with a massive COVID outbreak right now. I believe it's something like let me just double check the numbers here. It's over 90 now sailors who have tested positive for COVID at this point, and so they're probably going to see an entire crew rotation. So that's definitely caused them a bunch of issues, and then it comes back to the issue of course, COVID affecting the ability of a lot of nations to do interoperability and to actually operate in the first place, especially far from home. Yeah. Especially countries with low vaccination rates outside of their own home ports, and on a ship as well. Of course, if you get one case of COVID, that is very, very bad. Just due to the living conditions on a ship, you have 12 plus men bunking in the same room, and COVID would run through like wildfire, and that's what we've seen.
Could talk a bit about Russia's new unknown 5th gen fighter that's just made a random appearance out of nowhere.
Yeah. Let's talk about Russia's new fighter. We initially saw just hidden, at least, information coming out of, or teasers coming out of Russia, just for this new single-engine, single-seater fighter. And now it looks like we've got at least some leaked footage and pictures of it under wraps. It looks to be fairly similar. Honestly, like from my point of view, it looks like an ungodly child between an Su-57 and an F-22, just with one engine. And and also they crammed in I'm forgetting. Sorry, the demonstrator that was competing with the X-35 that has the undermounted air inlet for the engine. So it's a very interesting fighter. I'm not entirely sure where it's going to fit into sort of the current Russian stack. With, of course, right now Russia is trying to produce the Su-35 in enough numbers to actually replace its older jets, and the Su-57 program has had enough issues on its own without export customers and just with slow production. I'm not sure exactly where this fits into their stack.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously we do now have these images of the mock-up, and worth just noting that the mock-up has a tail number of Romeo Foxtrot 00075. At the time of recording, we don't know who the company responsible for the design is. We don't know what the designation for the type is going to be. And as Technical says, it looks like a Russian hybrid between the F-35, the F-22, and with there's clearly some of the design characteristics from the Su-57. Now, given that the Su-57 is a Sukhoi jet, and as Technical says, there's been issues with the production of that aircraft type. I can't imagine it being another Sukhoi design. It's possible that this is a Mikoyan-Gurevich design, in which case it's potentially aimed at replacing the MiG-29 in much the same way that the Su-57 is aimed at the Su-27. There's also been a suggestion it could be a Tupolev design. I find that unlikely, given that Tupolev's resources at the moment are most definitely focused on their future bomber, their Pak-Da design, as it's known. But yeah.
Yeah. Steve Trimble actually made an interesting point that this fighter may, due to the advertising around this fighter, seems to be mostly in English, which means it may be for primarily an export market.
It needs to do better export than the Su-57, because I mean it's only really Algeria who's been interested in it, who's going to be on the list for that.
Apart a while ago. It's in the process of falling apart. I will say that.
Yeah.
As the Algerian government continues to be put under pressure, both internally and externally. But I think with Russia's issues in high-level manufacturing of aircraft, that other countries like the US, the UK, and frankly, even China at this point has a much better ability to produce these aircraft. I don't know really where or what the intention of this is. It's going to stress their already limited ability to produce Su-35s and Su-57s. And
I was questioning with like the export of it is, who's the intended customer? It's going to be an expensive jet. It's not something cheap. Like, it's not something cheap you can export to poorer countries. It's going to be expensive, and it's only going to be larger countries with large budgets that could even possibly look to buy it.
I mean, maybe this is aimed mostly at India, but we've already seen issues India had with the Russian proposals to sell the Su-57 to them. So I honestly, it's sort of baffling where this fits in.
Yeah, and it does seem a strange thing for Russia to be doing at a time when, like you say, it's not just the aviation side of things that Russia's struggling with in terms of manufacturing. They're also really struggling with their aircraft carriers. That's been an ongoing story now for a couple of years. They keep coming up with new designs, and then they can't actually afford to build any of them.
Yeah, the surface fleet seems to be recovering a bit at this point. And the sub-fleet as well. Honestly, most of Russia's success has been with submarine operations and submarine procurement.
Yeah.
But I mean, at this point, their aircraft manufacturing capabilities are so stressed.
Yeah, and that's not an issue that is going to resolve itself overnight. It's to be honest, it's a surprise really that Russia is even bothering with this design at all. Obviously, at the minute we are seeing China is kind of also manufacturing its own sort of twin engine and single engine designs for fifth generation fighters. You've got obviously the J-20, which is their sort of concept for an F-22 style jet, and then they've also got the FC-31, which is a smaller jet, sort of similar size and capability to the F-35.
Well, and to whatever the new Russian jet ends up being, the FC-31 looks very similar at least from what we've seen so far, and this is honestly a lot of speculation involved as well, capabilities-wise, and the Chinese have a better ability to actually, produce the jet in the first place.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I know Tyler mentioned this aviation intel on Twitter, but a lot of countries who would be potential customers for this, and even the something like the F-35, are producing their own aircraft domestically. Korea, China, Turkey. So it just seems we've seen the marketplace sort of change over the past 20 years from the two big producers to a lot more domestic production of these aircraft.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that particularly with likes of Japan and Turkey and even Sweden, for example, a lot of the designs that are coming out of these countries are really good rivals to a certain extent, to particularly for the export market where the US and Russia have dominated for so long. We know that there's a lot of European and sort of Southeast Asia countries that are now looking at Japanese and Swedish alternatives rather than buying American or Russian, and ultimately a lot of that comes down to cost.
Yeah, again, if it's going to be the same price to produce something domestically, some countries have gone with that route in the first place, and additionally, as we saw with the Swedish procurement, if they're willing to spend, if the pocketbook is theoretically unlimited, they're going to go with the U.S. option, just in general. Some countries won't, but most NATO countries, European countries, even India at this point, we're seeing more of at least more of a slant towards operating NATO and U.S. equipment. But moving into the future, it's just you can order something from Russia and potentially get it in 10 years, as Algeria has seen, or you can get something from the U.S. and have it within the next few years with intense support from the host country as well. The only condition is that the U.S. gets to install a kill switch in every aircraft.
Yeah.
That's only a rumor.
And while we're on the topic of newer aircraft, obviously it's been in the pipeline for a while and we've heard lots about it, but we've now got seemingly the first semi-official schematics for China's upcoming stealth bomber. The Jian H-20 has been fairly well publicised by China for some time, I think it's fair to say. They've been talking about it a lot. But today we've actually seen for the first time sort of a schematic of it in a magazine. And I think the thing that stood out for all of us most of all was that it looks very much like the US B-21 Raider design.
Yeah. So there are two options here. Either they're just copying the design from renderings that were released by the US, which the timeline somewhat fits up with that, or the other option, which is equally as interesting, is that potentially there was some sort of data breach, and they were able to acquire schematics from the US.
And I think it's fair to say that regardless of which case it is, it's got to be something of concern to the US and to NATO, because it looks an incredibly potent design.
Yeah, I think what China has proven at least is that they have the ability to get things at least 95% as close as the U.S. Make potentially more of them, and at a much cheaper price, which of course is somewhat concerning as well. Because I mean that's again, if you look at World War II, how did the U.S. and Russia win? Making stuff 95% as good, but a heck of a lot cheaper, and with better logistics behind it.
Well, it was saying Chinese bomber might will probably be one of the big usages of it is probably to go and hit. It's entirely intended to go beyond the first island chain. As in, I think that's a significant step. As in, it's saying, look, we'll hit targets far beyond this island chain. We can keep we're strike fighters for this. These things are going to go across the Pacific and far south to hit targets.
Yeah, because of course the first island chain is fairly well covered with relatively, uninterceptable large quantities of short-range ballistic missiles. And longer range operations using stealth aircraft, obviously, that's not really meant for the first island chain. It also might be meant as a threat to countries to the south and to the west. Like India, which we've seen a lot of tensions between them and China over the over the past few years. So again, I mean, you can't just look at China has a lot of neighbors. It's unfriendly with some of them. It's friendly with others, and they have a lot of their own domestic politics, procurement stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. I think that's sort of a caveat we should probably put at the bottom of the description of every show. We aren't geniuses. There's some stuff we're familiar with, but there's a lot we don't know, and a lot of the stuff that we do is make educated guesses, and rely on the work and the commentary of other people who know more than us. And so with stuff like the new Chinese aviation, all the new Chinese projects. There's of course a lot of stuff that we aren't privy to and that we just don't have the information about. And so we have to make those guesses. I mean, we can make educated guesses, but there's a lot of stuff, who is this aimed at? What message are they trying to say? Is this for a domestic audience or is this aimed at an international audience? And so that's sort of something that we have to balance it at all times, at least dealing with this. So, sorry, just pulling up some stuff that I had saved. So tensions continue to increase between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia as the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam project continues to go ahead, and the filling process has started. President Sisi of Egypt affirmed Egypt's right to preserve its water security and its historical right to the waters of the Nile. There definitely seems to be a lot of tension between Egypt and Ethiopia over this issue, as this effectively gives Ethiopia control over the water supply in the Nile, which is again essential to the existence of both Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. So that fight will continue into the future. Domestically inside the U.S., the National Guard is about 2 weeks away from shutting down operations. This comes after a nearly $500 million bill that was unfunded, protecting the Capitol after the insurrection during the election and then after the inauguration. This would actually affect a lot of things, including both promotions, pay, pre-deployment training, regular training activities, school activity. In the US, a lot of promotions involve rigorous classwork as well and training activity, which the National Guard will not be able to run in September, August, I believe October and November. So that would be a significant risk. Heavy fighting continues in Kandahar City in the south of Afghanistan between the ANDSF and the Taliban. It's moved in from the southern suburbs into multiple districts inside the city. The Taliban continues to fight with heavy weapons, and it's just very intense urban warfare right now. The Afghan government has also implemented a curfew inside of Kandahar City as well. And then I think we're all probably need to comment on this one, but straight from the UK Defense Journal, a gamer identifying as a Challenger 2 commander has posted a classified document online in order to improve the accuracy of the game War Thunder, which we all play.
There's commitment to the game, and then there's literally binning off your whole career and breaching fucking laws for it.
I will say, um, I'm probably one of the few people who will even slightly defend the tank commander, but the Challenger 2 is really bad, and I'm sure he wanted to improve. No, that the documents were were possibly incorrectly marked by someone else as unclassified, um, which may have led to it may have been an unintentional leak. I'm sure there will be a fairly large MOD investigation into this, and people are definitely losing their jobs. Some people may not go to prison. It just depends whether or not this was a miscommunication or some sort of accident. I guess that's probably the best explanation. I don't think anyone would be willingly stupid enough to leak classified documents in that manner. There's obviously a bit more of an explanation um, with that as well.
Mhm. It's just, oh, I mean, the Challenger 2 in the game isn't a great tank, but I mean, like, what was he even going to think they would do with it? Like, they're just going to say, "Oh, cheers, thanks for the classified government documents."
Yeah, I there might have been a jump in logic. But hey, if you got to win an internet argument, you got to win an internet argument.
It's just, it's just a weird one.
I mean, yeah, yeah, it's bad. Um, Moving on to the Middle East, the Lebanese Prime Minister designate Saad Hariri has stepped down. He's basically failed to form a government over the past nearly year now. So this will most likely trigger some new elections. And as a result, the Lebanese pound, which has been hammered over the past few years after crisis in Lebanon, including issues with the banking system, then the explosion in Beirut, then the coronavirus outbreak. It's possibly the worst time for Lebanon right now in its modern post Civil War history. Um, so that will continue to put pressure on the Lebanese government. I did talk with an expert on Lebanon and Lebanese Israeli relations. Even though Hamas and Hezbollah is a very large power inside of Lebanon, they will most likely avoid taking over in order to not be responsible for the massive domestic issues right now. Um, just the domestic issues are so huge that no one really wants to be in charge of them. Um, so we'll most likely see this continue to just be a cycle of civil unrest and various governmental unrest as well. Um, I think the last thing I should probably hit on is it's been revealed that the Iranian government plotted to kidnap an American journalist inside of America. Um, they sent private detectives and Iranian agents to the U.S. In order to surveil and come up with a plan to actually kidnap this journalist. They were stopped and arrested by the FBI, but this certainly demonstrates Iran's willingness to target people who cause them issues. They also conducted at least surveillance operations in Canada, the UK, the UAE, and some other countries that were not mentioned as well in the indictment. Um, they hired local private investigators to photograph entrances of homes, to follow family members, and to monitor their contracts. So that's something that's definitely a bit concerning to us as well. And I think that's it for the news stories that I've highlighted. Did anyone else want to comment as well?
I think that's pretty much everything. I think we've talked about everything significant
I think there
that's
was
happened
just one other
in.
story, if you don't mind my adding. Um, Russia has announced this evening that their domestic intelligence agency, the FSB, has foiled an Islamic terrorist plot to target Moscow. Um, Now, I don't know any of the details of that, but it's worth saying that, particularly in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, when Europe was being hit by terrorist attack after terrorist attack, Russia was not exempt from that. I think it's fair to say there was a few sort of notable attacks, mainly against train networks in a couple of major Russian cities. And so for Russia to turn around and again say that they've foiled yet another attack, I just think that's quite interesting, particularly in light of Russia's current involvement in Syria and elsewhere.
Yeah, and of course they've had historic issues with terrorism ever since the Chechen War started, and even slightly before that. And that's something that, not to say we expected per se, but it's historically a thing that we've seen. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope the next 2 weeks are a bit more quiet so we can get some rest.
Oh no, he's used the Q word.
Oh, we're doomed. Sorry. Go to your bomb shelters.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening, everyone, and we will catch you again in 2 weeks' time.